Hi everyone. So in today's class, finally, we are going to see how to do the pagination in the data connector. So there are different ways that you can do pagination in Qlik Cloud. So the easiest one usually is when you do the data pagination inside the data connector. That means your data connector already handles everything that it needs to do the pagination. So it returns the full collection of all the records. If the data connection does not support the pagination offered by your REST API, then we have to use the load script. So that requires some manipulation there. And this can be something simple, like just checking if a value is null every cycle, or can be something very complex. But again, that depends on the REST API pagination style. So the idea here is to provide you the tools where you can identify if you can do the data pagination in your data connector. That's the preferable way, or if you have to do the data pagination in the load script. So in the first class in this area, you'll be about doing the data pagination inside the REST data connection. Okay. So why pagination, right? So why you need to do that? So in most REST connectors, some does not have pagination. That means every time you do a pull request, it returns every single line of code. But in order to reduce the stress on the server and not have to wait for long periods of time to have the full collection, some REST APIs implement paginations. And the pagination is just split the number of records per pages. And in most cases, you can define how many records you can return per page. It's usually 10 up to 100, sometimes 500 records, 1,000. Again, REST APIs is always depends on how it was implemented. So that's one of the main questions. Like, okay, I have 5,000 customers. How I get all these? Since my REST API returns only 100 records, so I have to do data pagination. So you have to request that multiple times, 50 times, 500 times, in order to get all the records, right? So then this is what we're going to learn here. In this case, all these pagination mechanisms will be handled by the data connection. So you don't, the end users, like if you're just receiving the connections and the developer said, hey, use this connection, it's all good, just load the data. You don't even know how the pagination is handled. You just know that it's returning all the records. So this is when all the pagination is handled by the data connection itself. So you don't need to do any extra development to do the data pagination. Okay. So and again, pretty much every API has a pagination style. So we have to learn, understand, and see if how Qlik supports it. Okay. Yes. So then if you have the pagination, so let's say you every time you have a new implementation, a new REST API to implement, so you need access to the documentation. Okay. And from the documentation, you're going to learn the authentication. So how you do the authentication, right? And pagination style and the endpoints available. So then from the pagination style, you have to detect if you can implement that in Qlik, in the data connection, or you have to handle that in the load script. And then at the end of this class, you're going to see like a decision tree that you take in order to evaluate if it's possible or not. I see in multiple real case scenarios, developers don't even care if the data connection handles the pagination or not. They always implement in the load script because they learned that path. So they just pick that one. But if you do the data implementation, the data pagination inside the connections, it's much easier to implement, and it's more robust. So it's less chance to failure. Okay, so the pagination, the data connection is a preferable way. All right. Okay, and for this case, for the two next class, you're going to see two pagination styles. So for the Qlik one, is the next URL pagination, and the Stripe use the cursor one. So Qlik does not support the cursor pagination. So this one you have to implement in the load script. Okay. So how the pagination, the next URL pagination works. So every single API in Qlik Cloud that returns multiple items, they have this same pagination style. Is the next URL. Okay. So this is an attribute that shows up at the end of the root of the response. If you have this set of records for the next URL pagination, that means there's an extra page. If it's nothing there, that means there's no extra page. So all the records are inside the same connection. Okay, so you see this one is by this links next href. So we can I can show that for you in Postman in a second. So again, most of the endpoints that returns multiple items in Qlik, you return this next URL pagination style. So I have the items, spaces, users, reloads, etc. Okay. All right. So then in the connection, when you go to the REST data connection, there's a section there to do pagination. Okay. And then you have multiple options. The options that we're going to use there is the next URL. So this one here, it's very straightforward. Okay. So let's go there. First of all, let me show you this in Postman. So I have the items here in Postman to show the apps. Okay. So then if you go, so the collection again is the data of, in this case, the items. The items are the applications. If I reduce this node, again, brackets, query brackets means collections in JSON. So then this is the root. Inside the roots, you see there's a next href. So links next href. That's the navigation path inside JSON that we need to get the next item. So the next pagination. So this is the link that Qlik creates automatically for us. Okay, it's impossible to replicate that. You need to trust the REST API to handle that collection. And for Qlik, I saw that in some cases, some other APIs returns links, the same structure, links next href, but then they just show v1, API v1, and whatever they need. They don't show the base URL and everything else. For Qlik data connection to work, that's very important. You need the full address. It cannot be a partial address. Qlik does not resolve the URL if you don't have the whole path. If that happens, you have to use the load script pagination. Okay, it does not support it. Some REST APIs offers two types of pagination 3 times in the same application. So be aware of that. Maybe this one doesn't work for you, but maybe they have a next token inside it, or the offset in the same API. Okay, so you have to. They can support multiple times, so be aware of that. Okay, and now if I go to the application. So this is our episode 5 application. So I can use the very same one. Let me reload again the application. Okay. So you see now how the pagination works. Again, because I don't have pagination, it only returns the first page, okay? So I go to the data model viewer, and I'll see apps. I think we have 9 records in this one. Yes, 9 rows, and spaces 4 rows. So if I implement pagination, I expect to see all the related spaces and applications. More than that, okay? So then the first one that I'm going to do is to change the items. So I go to the items, edit connection. Okay. My bearer token is still here. So this is where I need to change the pagination, okay? You see them multiple times. We're going to see that again at the end of the class. But the one that we need is the next URL, okay? So in the next URL, just need the path. And the path for this is links, href, href. So if we go back to the Postman, this is a navigation link. So links, next, href. So then you get the value inside this, okay? I'll copy this for now. Test connection won't give you the answer, okay? It may work. I never saw the next URL giving a wrong value. So if I add anything here, it won't detect it. So if that works, if your pagination works, don't trust it. So you have to load to test, okay? So hit save. And then now I just changed items. So I'm expecting to see more than 9 rows here because I have multiple ones, okay? So let's load it. So I didn't change anything in my code. That's the important thing. The data connection, you handle the whole change, the whole thing, the whole pagination. So that's the beauty of doing. Now you see now 24, 25, and being reduced by the number of spaces that I have here. So just change the connection, change the number of records that I'm loading. So that's a very good. That's why I avoid doing the pagination inside the load script. First, your code is simple to keep, and you just need to change the connection. You don't need to change anything else. And if you need to reuse that in another connection, in another builder or another app, you just use the connection, right? So you don't need to bring the whole logic to do the pagination. So now let's do the same thing on spaces. So if I go to spaces, scroll down, pagination type, next URL, links, next href, save it. I don't need to test. Again, when you save, Qlik executes a test connection. So you're testing anyway. So now I do a load. And now I'm expecting multiple apps and spaces. Oh, much more now. So if I go here, applications now, I have 103, spaces 26. So I have multiple spaces here, okay? Remember, I'm having less records because I'm using the inner keep. If I remove the inner keep, you'll be even more. So if I just, okay, bring whatever you have. So you have more apps, more spaces. Okay. All right. Yeah, it's still 103 and 37. Okay. It's because of this guy. Yeah, if I remove this, let's do one more test. because this is not adding the personal ones. So if I remove this guy, okay, then I have more than 103. So I have all the applications in the data. That all the applications that I have access. It's not that much more. Okay. Here's 126. No space ID because it's personal. And here, in here is 237. Okay, good. All right. So this is the pagination in the data connection. Okay. So again, go to not this one. Go to the items. So all the Qlik ones will have the same style. You just set the pagination to next URL, and then you have the links next in href. Again, every REST API implements this in a different way. It doesn't mean that the next URL pagination in one other REST API will work in the same way. That depends. All right. Okay. So nice. So why the stripe cursor doesn't work? Okay. And so the thing is, the cursor one is not predictable. So you don't have a structure to support that. The value there is like the cursor style. The value is calculated, so it's based on the last record loaded in the first set. So Qlik does not support this one. Okay, so there is this. They have a flag has more true or false. That means is there a next page? And then the next request that you have to do, you need to provide another field. I forgot the name of the field, but you have to include an extra parameter to your next call. So in that one is based on the last record you have inputted in your first in the current page. Okay, so Qlik does not support that. So then you have to use the load script. That's the one that you're going to see on episode 7. And those pagination are used the most complex one. It's like OAuth pagination, right? You can have multiple steps, and this kind of pagination also requires multiple steps. Okay. All right. So what are the paginations supported by Qlik? So you have the none, offset, next page, next token, next URL, and custom. Custom is pretty much okay. Custom none is the same thing, right? It doesn't mean you can use. By the way, you can. These two you can set them up like none and custom and use it anyway. Like for Stripe one, if you set as none or custom, you can implement it. It doesn't matter. Okay. Offset, next page, next token, next URL. Next URL is the easiest one, and all of the others, it can be tricky, right? Especially, I think offset. I found offset complex, and it's hard for me to understand all the parameters because they look similar, and it's hard to figure out. But again, you have to check your REST API documentation. If they have an offset pagination, then you have the parameters, and then you have to figure out, okay, how do I fill these parameters here? Okay, and sometimes some REST APIs, the pagination is passed through the header instead of the URL as a parameter. You have to pass via header, so you won't see it in the URL. So it's passed through header. Again, documentation handle that. Next page, also it's similar to offset. Again, is not easy to implement because the values look very similar. Okay. Next token is usually simple. Just need a next token parameter and what's the path for it. Okay, and finally next URL. So next URL, especially for Qlik, very simple. Okay. Yeah, I'm not going into details about these because again, each one will have a different story. So every REST API is very particular. Okay. So that's why it's important to learn the fundamentals, and then you can implement that in your API. So my idea is when you have to implement your next REST API project, then you see it. First, you recreate this thing in Postman and check the authentication, and then study for the pagination and start trying to implement it. Okay. Let's go back to the slides. Okay. So how do you know which one to use? How do I know if I can use the data connection or I have to implement in load script? So again, always try to do the pagination in the data connection. Okay. So then you have to read the documentation of the REST API, and you have to see if your API return a named field for the next page. So if you have something predictable, like a next set of values, a token that you can refer to the next page or next URL. So if none of these things are available, then there's a high chance that you have to use the load script. At the end, if you're having problems to use a data connection pagination, you can always use the load script. Okay, it's not like a scene that you, oh man, I should never use the load script. It's just easier to keep. Okay. So in this class, we saw why we need pagination, right? So some REST APIs does not return all the records in one single request. So you need pagination to get the full collection. We saw the next URL pagination type in Qlik Cloud. Why Cursor does not work in the data connection? Because it does not have a predictive way to get the next records. We are going to see that in details in the next class, in the final chapter. What are the connector types, the pagination types, right? And how you should pick, how you can choose between the pagination in the data connection and the load script. So the pagination, the data connection is the preferable one because it's easier to manage it, and you don't need to change your load script to do the pagination. The load script is the most powerful one, but it can bring some complexity to a load script. So that's everything for this class, and I see you in the next one. Thank you very much.